Welcome to the Debrief here at ABC News Live. I'm Aaron Katursky. It seems President Trump isn't so happy with how his visits to Dayton and El Paso are being portrayed. We'll take you to the White House. We'll also get you caught up on immigration raids in Mississippi. Hundreds were taken into custody. And we'll go to all the fried butter and funnel cake goodness of the Iowa State Fair right after these headlines.
Police in Orange County, California say they have arrested a man with a knife who went on a stabbing spree late yesterday, killing 4 people and injuring 2 others. Police say the man's motive was not terrorism. Police say that the man was looking for money and trying to hold people up.
Simone Biles is taking USA Gymnastics to task for its part in the Larry Nassar scandal. The gymnast spoke out while preparing for the U.S. Championships. She was among the hundreds of athletes who were sexually abused by former team doctor Larry Nassar. Even after USA Gymnastics underwent a serious leadership overhaul, Biles became emotional when she talked about trusting the organization again.
It's hard coming here for an organization and having had them failed us so many times. And we had won gold. We've done everything that they asked us for, even when we didn't want to, and they couldn't do one damn job. You had one job. You literally had one job, and you couldn't protect us.
Nassar, by the way, will spend the rest of his life behind bars. 2 of the most popular fitness brands in New York City are fighting to retain members after an online backlash over a planned political fundraiser in the Hamptons. Equinox and its subsidiary SoulCycle are trying to distance themselves from the chairman of their parent company. That after it was revealed that Stephen Ross, billionaire and majority owner of the related companies, is hosting a $250,000 a head fundraiser for President Trump at his Hamptons home. That led to calls to boycott Equinox and SoulCycle. Ross released a statement saying the fundraiser is about job growth, going on to say that he's known the president for more than 40 years and, quote, while we agree on some issues, we strongly disagree on many others.
It's not your average Russian vodka. This artisan vodka has been produced with ingredients from the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and scientists say it's safe to drink. Scientists from the University of Portsmouth have created this atomic vodka, a spirit made with exclusion zone grain and water, making it the first consumer product to come from the area around the abandoned nuclear power plant.
President Trump is back at the White House today after visiting Dayton, Ohio, and El Paso, Texas, the scenes of the 2 latest mass shootings in this country. And he doesn't seem to be very pleased with how those visits are being portrayed. He was greeted by protesters in both places. And so we turn right to the White House first now, and ABC's Jordan Phelps, who's covering for us. This was supposed to be a moment where the president preached unity, Jordan, but there were other messages that got mixed in there, too.
Hey, Aaron, in fact, as the president left the White House for Dayton and El Paso yesterday, he said he wanted it to be a time for healing and unity and said he wanted to stay out of the political fray. But we know that in between those hospital visits, first to Dayton and then El Paso, that the president was privately fuming to his aides aboard Air Force One. And then not so privately, he took to Twitter to take aim at his critics, both real and imagined. He went after, soon after leaving Dayton, he went after Senator Sherrod Brown and the mayor of Dayton. He seems to catch a glimpse of their press conference and said that what he saw was a total fraud and mischaracterization of what had happened at that hospital. But, Aaron, it's a little unclear what the president took issue with, because both of those politicians were offering praise for President Trump and said that he did the right thing in coming. The president also airing some frustration against Joe Biden, against Joaquin Castro, and, of course, the media in a set of tweets.
And after the trip, we know that the president spoke to the head of the NRA. We know the president has said, Jordan, there is an appetite for background checks, no appetite for banning any kind of assault-style weapon. What's possible after that conversation?
Yeah, Aaron, that might be a potential complicating factor that the president talked to Wayne LaPierre. We know that the NRA chief convinced the president out of some major changes after the Parkland shooting in Florida that motivated the president initially to make some big changes. But the president has told us publicly as recently as yesterday morning that he does want to do something big on background checks. He's also endorsed these red flag laws, which allow authorities to confiscate weapons from people who are shown to pose a threat to themselves or others. And the president president says he's talking to Mitch McConnell in leadership about what can be done and that he'd be willing to call Congress back to session. But right now, no sense that there's any real political movement to make this happen, Aaron.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, too, because both red flag laws and background checks are broadly popular, according to ABC News polling, but doesn't seem to be an appetite on Capitol Hill to do anything immediately, despite calls.
Mitch McConnell has said he's not going to do something that he can't get the majority of the Republican conference behind. And so I think there is a general skepticism here in Washington, having seen this debate happen so many times, to know the way that this goes, that I think the Republican Party, there's some reluctance to get behind something publicly, just to see this debate fall apart once again.
ABC's Jordan Phelps covering the White House for us. Jordan, our thanks to you. As she mentioned, the president's first stop yesterday was Dayton, Ohio. So let's get you caught up there. We're learning about a hero bouncer at a bar. ABC's Eva Pilgrim is on the ground for us. Eva.
Aaron, you can see they've actually put out these crosses here now with all of the victims' names on them. We spoke with the gentleman who was the bouncer at Ned Pepper's the night of the Dayton shooting, and he tells us that he knew he couldn't stop the gunman, but he knew that the cops were close by because he'd been talking to them earlier in the night, and he hoped that if he stood in the door, he could slow that shooter down.
He looked at me straight in the eye. Did you see him pause for a second? It's because he's looking at me. Like, why are you holding the door? So he knew I was there waiting. That's what I wanted him to know. I'm hoping I'm the last thing he remembered. I would have died before that guy came in. There's no way I was going to let anyone get hurt. I was going to try to stand my ground best I could. The next thing I know, he's being shot by the officer.
Now, Jeremy tells me that he is planning to go back to work. He says that if he doesn't come back to work, he feels like the shooter will have won in some way, and he doesn't want that gunman to beat him. We do know, Jeremy told me, he's been back here to Ned Pepper's. When he got out of the hospital, this was one of the first places that he came to, and he says he came here because he wanted to make sure that all of his coworkers were okay. Aaron.
ABC's Eva Pilgrim and the growing memorial behind her outside the bar there in Dayton, Ohio, one of the scenes of the latest mass shootings in this country, leaving 9 people dead, plus the gunman Connor Betts. There is some other news happening in other parts of the country. In Mississippi, there was a big immigration raid. Hundreds of undocumented immigrants were taken into custody. And so we turn to Washington and ABC's Sophie Tatum, who covers immigration for us here at ABC News. Sophie, what happened in Mississippi yesterday?
Yeah, so what happened yesterday, there were 680 individuals who were arrested, or approximately 680, in what officials are calling the largest single state immigration enforcement action in U.S. history. It took place over the course of the morning, where in 6 different cities, 7 different agricultural processing plants, these hundreds of individuals were taken into ICE custody and taken to a processing center in Jackson, Mississippi, to be processed and go eventually before an immigration judge to kind of determine what will happen next for them.
Sophie, this didn't just come out of nowhere. This operation had been planned a while?
Yeah, so officials yesterday said that they had been planning this enforcement action for over a year. It involved more than 600 agents, they said, who came into these different cities in Mississippi for what they had been preparing for, it seems like a while. So.
When all of this unfolded, you mentioned 680 in total taken into custody. There were a number of kids who were in school when all of this happened and their parents were taken into custody. How do you have a sense of how the operation unfolded?
I think that with the kids, what we know and what we've reported is that they were all taken to local elementary schools to eventually be, reunited with some of their parents. But it is all very case by case, depending on the immigration status of their parent or who they're staying with.
Was there any reason that authorities gave you, Sophie, about why this operation had to take place now? Because we know immigration has been a focus of the administration, but certainly the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies have been trying to confront mass shootings and deal with that. It seems as if maybe this could have waited?
You know, they were asked about that yesterday at the press conference, and they said that this was something that they had been planning for so long, that although these instances that happened over the weekend were tragic and horrific, that they had plans to continue and go forward with the immigration enforcement yesterday.
Okay, Sophie, thanks. ABC's Sophie Tatum for us in Washington, D.C. Let's get on the ground in Mississippi, though, with Michael Bermudez to see how the community came together as immigration officers were going through the community. Michael, we heard Sophie report to us that kids were in school while parents were being arrested. So how did this all unfold?
Well, yeah, the raid happened around 9 o'clock. Most of the kids, were obviously in school. The teachers were informed, the schools were informed, so they were real good on getting the kids home to somebody that they knew the kids was going to be safe with. Well, even though they did their part, a lot of these kids were still wondering where their mom and dad were. And Jordan Barnes is a local business owner here, owns a fitness center. I saw his post where he said he had opened his doors to allow kids to come in that needed shelter. And when I saw it, I reached out to him and said, "Hey, man, let me team up with you, get these kids in here and do a lot more than just bringing them shelter. Let's get them information. Let's get people here help, food." And the community really came together. We all put in what we did was not a big deal, but we did our part.
No, it might have been a big deal to those kids, though, whose parents had been detained. It really seems like, as you say, the community mobilized.
Yeah, correct. I mean, it was impressive for me to see the way the community came together. It was just, it really meant a lot to those kids. And we've had people from Texas fly in, offering help. People from California have been calling me, offering donations and food and school supplies, anything, because these kids have only been in school for 2 or 3 days. Most of them are probably still getting their school supplies, and with their parents now either detained or out without a job, they're going to need help. So it is great to see not just the four-county community, it's just all over the United States. Everybody's calling in to help.
Well, Michael, we appreciate you bringing us up to speed on the ground in Mississippi. Michael Bermudez, after the immigration raids unfolded in several counties in Mississippi. Immigration enforcement was one of the reasons that the community of El Paso had been mobilized against President Trump's visit to the city after the mass shooting. And there were protests in El Paso as the president was visiting. ABC's Lisette Rodriguez is on the ground there for us now. How did the community end up reacting as the president visited some of the victims and first responders, Lisette?
Well, throughout the day and throughout his visit, there were various rallies throughout El Paso with people protesting Trump's visit, people protesting his immigration laws, people protesting his rhetoric towards the Mexican-American community in El Paso. Afterwards, though, this entire space here yesterday completely filled with people dancing, praying. One of those people here, presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke, he stood here just last night with someone who lost his wife of 22 years, and he told Beto that he has been coming here every night since Saturday to mourn the loss of his wife in this massacre.
The investigation has taken something of a new turn, Lisette, as the mother of the shooter, Patrick Crusius, has come forward to say that she actually went to police concerned that her son had the kind of ammunition and weapon that he did.
He did, and what we're hearing here on the ground is we've talked to various people in El Paso, many of them veterans, and many of them have told us that while they are for gun rights, while they have conceal and carry licenses, they're not for people having assault weapons, something that they wanted Donald Trump to hear from them yesterday.
But the president did not address, did he, on the ground there, any form of gun control? We know he talked to the NRA about background checks, but the president has said there is no appetite, either in Congress or in the country, in his belief, for any kind of assault-style weapons ban.
He did not talk about gun legislation while he was here. He instead met with various victims at the hospitals that they are currently at. And when we spoke to Beto O'Rourke while he was here yesterday, he said, amongst other El Pasoans, that they are thankful that the president came to spend time with the people here, to see that the pain that they're going through, but they feel insulted that he came here given the rhetoric he's had about Mexican Americans.
ABC's Lisette Rodriguez on the ground in El Paso, Texas, where that community is still coming together and healing following the mass shooting, motivated, it seems, by anti-immigrant, anti-Mexican sentiment. I want to turn next to Cyntoia Brown, the woman who was convicted of killing a man who had solicited her for sex, sentenced to life in prison. She is now free after serving 15 years in prison. A number of activists came together to work for her freedom, including Yasmin Vafa, who joins us now from Washington. She's the executive director of Rights for Girls. What a gratifying moment this must be for you.
Absolutely. It's a tremendous amount of success, and one that many individuals and advocates across the country have been fighting for decades.
Kim Kardashian, Rihanna, LeBron James, those are some of the bold-faced names, but there was a lot of activism on the ground, beyond the famous people, right?
Absolutely. There have been folks who've been working on Cyntoia's case in Tennessee for truly decades, and her legal team has done a tremendous job, led by Charles Bone and others, and we've been very grateful to be able to support their efforts to amplify their calls for her freedom, and we're just thrilled to see that she's finally been released after all these years behind bars.
And this is one success story, but the issue of human trafficking, it barely got a mention in the last Democratic debate. Is this going to help the country focus a bit?
We certainly hope so. One of the things that we like to point out about Cyntoia's case is that, unfortunately, it's not too uncommon. There's many other young women and girls like Cyntoia who have been criminalized for their exploitation and for essentially being forced to take their safety into their own hands because they've been failed by every system entrusted with their care, by all of the adults entrusted with their care. Young women and girls like Alexis Martin, who was also sentenced as a minor to a life in prison in Ohio for being involved in the death of her trafficker. She, in that case, didn't pull the trigger, but there's many other young girls like Cyntoia out there, and so we're hopeful that through all of the attention that her case rightly deserved, we're able to amplify the voices of so many other young women who are currently behind bars, who really don't deserve to be there, and that we're hoping we can amplify calls to get their release.
We have a couple of cases here in New York with Jeffrey Epstein and R. Kelly that are bringing the broader issue to light. You guys working on anything next in particular that we should know about?
Absolutely. I think we've been very involved in the Jeffrey Epstein case. I think that was another example of how far we've come in our collective understanding that victims in cases like his and in cases like Cyntoia Brown are not, in fact, underage women. They are not child prostitutes, right? And so I think we've grown a lot in our collective understanding that these are, in fact, children who were serially raped. They're survivors of egregious forms of sexual and physical violence. And so we really need to treat them like that. Our systems need to treat them like that and afford them the same services that we would grant to any other victim of child sexual abuse. And so we're continuing to work on cases like Alexis Martin's, Marianne Atkins out in the Seattle area, and also just spreading information about the pervasiveness of this problem in our communities throughout the country. Here in D.C., we get between 5 to 8 referrals of children who are being bought and sold per week. So it's a tremendous problem, and not just in Washington, D.C., but throughout the country.
5 referrals a week. That's something. Yasmin Vafa, the executive director of Rights for Girls, our thanks to you for bringing the issue to our attention. And I want to turn to another issue that merits our attention, and that is Puerto Rico, which has still been struggling to recover from financial problems, from hurricanes, and now there is a new governor. The third governor in 3 weeks. ABC's Josh Hoyos has been following all the developments in Puerto Rico, and he's with us now live. Good to see you, my friend.
Great to see you.
This new governor didn't want to be governor, but now she is?
She didn't want to be governor. She's been a career attorney, a member of the Justice Department, a prosecutor on the island for over 30 years. And because of the line of succession and the craziness that is Puerto Rican politics, she ended up becoming the governor, the third in a week. somehow.
Who is Wanda Vasquez? What do we need to know about her?
So 30 years as a prosecutor, a jurist, part of the Justice Department. She was appointed the Secretary of Justice for the island by Ricardo Rosselló, and she held the job until yesterday, honestly. So she found herself in the center of this entire firestorm because of the rules of the line of succession.
No matter your politics, I think you can agree the people of Puerto Rico have not been entirely well served by their leadership in recent months, years, maybe decades. Is there any prospect for that to change?
It's difficult. I mean, so her announcement yesterday and her speech that she gave to the island later on in the evening, she very much tried to say, I am one of you. I was a member, and I grew up in the public school system. I stayed on the island after going to college, and I understand the needs and the problems you have. The big thing here is the island's government really hasn't been doing the job of governing in the last month. I mean, after Ricardo Rosselló left, appointing Pedro Pierluisi in the last 5 minutes of his term as governor, Pierluisi being sued by the Senate to get him removed, to get Wanda Vasquez in, no one has really been doing their job on the larger level of the island. And so she is coming into this entire mess, really trying to realize she has to secure federal funding for different programs, whether it's for food stamps or for hurricane recovery. She has to get the economy back on track, and she has to deal with infrastructure problems.
Yeah, there's no lack of a to-do list.
No, she's coming in not just with the problems of the last month that haven't been looked at, but like you say, the problems of the last decades that really haven't been faced. And she has about a year to try to get the ship back on course before handing it off to the next governor.
Who will be duly elected.
Yes, November of next year, there'll be the next election. That's been the big question, whether there would be a by-election or not. The Constitution of Puerto Rico has never been tested in this way. And so when the Supreme Court of the island actually came down with their ruling to say that the loophole that got Pedro Pierluisi actually elected was unconstitutional, they said, oh, by the way, the rest of the law is fine. It's just that one little loophole. So they're actually trying to realize how to read the Constitution and how to make sense of it.
That's fun, Puerto Rico politics.
Totally fun.
ABC's Josh Hoyos, good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
Want to turn to Ohio next because there's a home explosion that is now being investigated as a possible hate crime. ABC's Alex Perez on the ground for us there. Alex.
Hey, Aaron, still a lot of unanswered questions here in Sterling. I want you to take a look behind me here. You can see what's left of this home, basically a huge pile of rubble. The home basically leveled by this explosion. And yes, authorities believe this explosion was intentionally caused. After investigators arrived on the scene here, they found racial slurs and a swastika spray painted on the garage and the neighbors' vehicles. Now, the family who lives here has been here for about 23 years, and the African-American woman who has lived here for 23 years, Angela Fraze, she says she's never felt threatened here until now. Investigators say they're really turning to the public for help here. I want you to take a look behind me. You can see they've posted that little sign there outside of this home. It says arson. It also says they're offering a $5,000 reward for any information leading to an arrest. Now, as you might imagine, this is difficult for this family. You look here at this pile of rubble, but this is more than 2 decades of someone's home that was destroyed almost in an instant. Now, authorities say they also suspect someone tried to break into this house before this explosion and try to leave the gas running here, but at the time the utilities had actually been shut off because the family was making some repairs to the home. Now, thankfully, they were not inside this house during that blast. No one was injured, but at this point, this community here a little shaken up. The family who has lived here for 23 years says they are not considering rebuilding at this point because they are afraid they will be targeted again. Officials here are hoping that $5,000 reward will motivate someone to call them with some information that can help them crack this case. Aaron?
Amazing. ABC's Alex Perez on the ground in Ohio. If it does turn out to be a hate crime, it would be yet another indication of the increase in hate crimes of late in this country. So we'll stay on top of that. We're going to turn next to the place where politics and fried things meet, the Iowa State Fair. ABC's Adam Kelsey is there for us as it begins. This is the place where all the presidential candidates are going to be. It's a bit damp there, Adam. Is that going to dampen any of the attention?
Yeah, Aaron, it's going to be an unbelievable 11 days here at the State Fair. Unfortunately, we're getting a little bit of a rain shower, but this morning it was absolutely beautiful on the first day of the State Fair. And this is not, like you were saying, like your typical State Fair. They've got these all over the country, but here in Iowa, it is politics that takes center stage, or I should say it is politics that takes the soapbox. Right behind me is where 21 of these presidential candidates will be speaking over the course of this weekend. Today, it kicks off with Montana Governor Steve Bullock. He's followed a little bit later in the afternoon by former Vice President Joe Biden. And the way this works is that these candidates have 20 minutes to talk about basically whatever they want to. We're going to hear a lot from their stump speeches, but also expect them to talk about local issues, rural issues that are affecting Iowa farmers. They come from all over this Hawkeye state to come to this fair to hear candidates touch on those issues that are important to them. And I would imagine that a number of these candidates as well are going to talk about gun control, given the recent shootings in both Ohio and El Paso, Texas. And speaking of El Paso, it was supposed to be 22 presidential candidates that were here through Sunday. Beto O'Rourke, the former congressman from El Paso, deciding to stay in his hometown so that he could remain there with the victims of the shootings and help support the community. But in the meantime, we're hoping that this rain quiets down sometime soon. We want to get back out there, try some more of that fried food. I've already had some garlic cheese curds and a lemonade creamsicle so far today. The sugar's starting to get to me. I'm starting to get a little bit more energized, so I'm not going to let this rain keep me down, Aaron.
I can see the stomach churning, and it brings me back to fond memories. Have you gotten a sense any favorites yet among the Iowans who are at that fair and braving the weather with you?
Yeah, well, when you start to talk to the folks who are here, they are really politically engaged, and they want to hear everybody, from Joe Biden right at the top to Joe Sestak, former congressman from Pennsylvania who just entered the race. They're willing to hear everybody out, but Biden is obviously the big name. And you'll notice as you look behind me, this is not the biggest area in the world. This can really probably fit about 50 to 100 people, but when Joe Biden's here this afternoon, I would expect to pack in hundreds, even if it's raining, kind of make its way out into the street that's over to my left here. In addition to Joe Biden, we're hearing a lot more buzz about Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, somebody who we've seen in the polls slowly building over time. And in fact, we just saw a new Monmouth University poll polling folks here in Iowa just this morning. Elizabeth Warren going from the single digits all the way up to second place, now polling in the high teens just behind Joe Biden.
And we were concerned when we were at the last debate together that there may not be such public engagement. Is your sense that people really are excited to finally hear from these candidates one-on-one?
Well, I think you have to understand, Aaron, that Iowa is a different place than the rest of the country. The people who live here in the Hawkeye State take this responsibility as the first in the nation caucus extremely seriously. So you're going to see a lot more political engagement from the average voter here in Iowa than you might in some of the other states around the country. But that being said, you just mentioned it. We discussed this in Detroit last week. When you're in a state like that, in Michigan, that votes a little bit later on during primary season, when I'm following around candidates down south, where, again, they vote a little bit later on, they're not quite tuned in yet. But it's interesting that we're talking about this while we're at the Iowa State Fair, because this tends to be the time during this presidential campaign cycle that things kind of kick into high gear. And because we got started so early this year, all the way back in December and January for some of these candidates, some of the fatigue is starting to kick in maybe. But this Iowa State Fair, this renewal of energy should get us going up until next year.
All right, very good. ABC's Adam Kelsey on the ground at the Iowa State Fair. So for the latest on politics and for whatever Adam ends up consuming in fried fashion, you want to stick with us here at ABC News Live. The briefing room comes up today at 3:30 in the afternoon. A little bit later on, World News Tonight with David Muir, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And for the latest, you can always download the app at ABC News. I'm Aaron Katursky. Thanks for joining us on the briefing on the debrief here at ABC News Live. Have a good day.